What if everything you learned about religion's origins was backwards? What if temples came before farms? What if belief in spirits is older than our entire species? Here's the thing nobody tells you in school. For most of human history, we had no idea when religion started. We assumed it was a byproduct of civilization. First came agriculture, then cities, then writing, and somewhere along the way, people invented gods to explain what they couldn't understand. A nice, neat story. Completely wrong. In the last few decades, archaeologists and evolutionary psychologists have flipped this narrative on its head, and what they found is stranger than anyone expected. Your textbook got it wrong. Here's the story most of us were told. Humans invented farming, then settled down, then built cities, and somewhere in that process, religion appeared. Temples came after grain silos. Gods came after governments. Faith was a luxury product of civilization, something you develop once you have enough surplus wheat to support priests who don't do real work. Except that's not what happened at all. In 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt was wandering through southeastern Turkey when he stumbled onto something that would demolish this neat little timeline. It was a hill. Local farmers called it Potbelly Hill, which in Turkish is Göbekli Tepe. They'd been plowing around the weird stone slabs poking out of it for generations, assuming they were just medieval grave markers or natural rock formations. They weren't rocks. They were the tops of massive T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing 16 tons, carved with lions, foxes, scorpions, vultures, and abstract symbols nobody can quite decipher. When Schmidt started digging, he realized he was looking at the oldest known monumental structure on Earth, built around 9600 BCE. That's 6,000 years before Stonehenge, 7,000 years before the Great Pyramid. And here's what made archaeologists choke on their morning coffee. It was built by hunter-gatherers, people with no agriculture, no metal tools, no pottery, no permanent settlements, no domesticated animals. They were nomads, and they built a temple complex covering approximately 22 acres. Religion before bread. This discovery inverted everything. Schmidt himself put it bluntly. First came the temple, then the city. Göbekli Tepe suggests that organized religious activity didn't emerge from civilization. Civilization might have emerged from organized religious activity. The workers who built this place ate wild gazelle and aurochs. They gathered wild wheat and barley, but didn't plant it. Analysis of the animal bones found at the site shows no domesticated species. Yet somehow, bands of foragers coordinated to quarry 16-ton pillars from limestone bedrock using nothing but flint tools, transport them uphill without wheels or draft animals, and arrange them in precise circles decorated with symbolic carvings. The largest unfinished pillar found at the quarry weighs over 50 tons. Why would you do that? You're a hunter-gatherer. Your daily concern is not starving to death. Building a massive stone complex requires surplus labor, long-term planning, coordination between different groups, specialized skills, and a reason powerful enough to make hundreds of people show up and do back-breaking work for something they'll never personally live in. Religion is that reason. The pillars at Göbekli Tepe have arms carved on their sides. They have belts and loincloths. They're anthropomorphic, representing beings that aren't quite human but aren't quite animal either. Some pillars reach nearly 18 feet tall. Archaeologists think they might represent ancestors, powerful spirits, or something in between, figures that commanded enough respect to justify moving mountains of stone for their sake. The enclosures were deliberately filled in with debris and buried around 8000 BCE. Then new ones were built on top. This wasn't abandonment, it was ritual termination, something you do when a sacred space has served its purpose and needs to be properly closed. Even weirder, domesticated wheat first appears in the archaeological record just 20 miles from Gobekli Tepe, a few centuries after construction began. Did people invent farming to feed the workforce building their temple? It's a hypothesis some archaeologists take seriously. Recent research has complicated the picture slightly. Some scholars now argue Gobekli Tepe might have been a settlement with exceptionally elaborate houses rather than a pure temple complex. The debate continues, but even the skeptics agree that the site shows religious activity, ritual behavior, and symbolic complexity far predating agriculture. The religion after cities model is dead either way. Your brain is wired for gods. Alright, so early humans built temples before they built farms. That raises a weirder question. Why does religion exist at all? Why do human beings, across every culture ever documented, develop beliefs in invisible agents who care about what we do? One answer comes from evolutionary psychology, and it's kind of unflattering. Imagine you're a prehistoric human walking through tall grass on the African savanna. You hear a rustling sound. There are two possibilities. It's the wind, or it's a lion about to eat you. If you assume it's the wind and you're wrong, you die. If you assume it's a lion and you're wrong, you just feel a bit silly and keep walking. Maybe your heart rate spikes for nothing. Big deal, you're alive. Over millions of years, the humans who assumed agency, who assumed something was causing that sound on purpose, survived more often than the ones who took their time analyzing the situation rationally. The paranoid ones passed on their genes. The careful ones got eaten. Researchers call this the Hyperactive Agency Detection Device, or HAD. Your brain evolved to see intention everywhere, even when there isn't any. That shadow moving in your peripheral vision? Could be a predator. That coincidence of events? Could be a sign from something. That illness right after you insulted your neighbor? Someone might have caused it. Your brain throws false positives constantly, because false positives cost almost nothing, while false negatives can kill you. This is useful for avoiding lions. It's also the cognitive foundation for believing in spirits, ancestors, gods, demons, and anything else that watches, judges, or intervenes in human affairs. Your brain didn't evolve to understand the universe accurately. It evolved to keep you alive. And keeping you alive meant being suspicious of every rustle, every shadow, every unusual event, every coincidence. Stuart Guthrie, an anthropologist, argued that religion is essentially anthropomorphism gone wild. We see faces in clouds because our brains are pattern recognition machines optimized for detecting agents. Justin Barrett, a cognitive scientist, extended this idea and coined the HAD concept. Some researchers now question whether HAD is really a distinct cognitive module or just a label for general pattern-seeking behavior. The debate continues, but the core observation holds. Humans are naturally inclined to see minds behind events. The Neanderthal question. Were Neanderthals religious? This question used to get you laughed out of academic conferences. Neanderthals were supposed to be brutish, almost humans, capable of making tools but incapable of symbolic thought, language, or anything resembling spirituality. That view has aged about as well as milk in the sun. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, archaeologists in the 1950s and 60s found a Neanderthal skeleton from about 70,000 years ago, surrounded by pollen from flowers, including yarrow, cornflowers, and grape hyacinth. For decades, this was interpreted as evidence of Neanderthal burial with flowers, a funeral rite suggesting beliefs about death and perhaps an afterlife. Some researchers now think wind or burrowing animals might have deposited the pollen accidentally, but recent re-excavations led by Cambridge paleoanthropologist Emma Pomeroy found additional evidence, including a nearly complete upper body skeleton nicknamed Shanidar Z, positioned in what appears to be a deliberately prepared depression, with a rock placed behind the skull like a pillow. Pomeroy put it carefully. If Neanderthals were using Shanidar Cave as a site of memory for the repeated ritual interment of their dead, it would suggest cultural complexity of a high order. At La Ferracie in France, Neanderthals buried their dead in graves, with stone tools and animal bones. At La Chapelle aux Saints, also in France, a skeleton was found in a depression that was deliberately modified to create a grave, the bones showing none of the weathering or animal gnaw marks you'd expect if the body had been left exposed. At Teshiktash in Uzbekistan, a Neanderthal child was buried encircled by goat horns. In Spain, archaeologists found a Neanderthal toddler's grave surrounded by 30 animal horns from bison and red deer, hearths with evidence of lit fires, and a rhinoceros skull nearby. Archaeologist Enrique Bacadano described this as a probable funeral ritual held 40,000 years ago. Neanderthals also collected eagle talons, possibly as jewelry. They used red ochre and other mineral pigments. They made abstract marks on cave walls in Spain at least 65,000 years ago, before modern humans arrived in Europe. Patrick McNamara, a neurology professor at Boston University, stated directly, "If by religion we mean ritual behaviors directed at supernatural agents, then yes, I believe Neanderthals were religious. Their beliefs were very likely close to what we call shamanism, a visionary form of religious experience. We didn't invent religious thought. We might have inherited it from cousins we used to dismiss as dumb brutes. The capacity for spiritual experience might be older than our species. That's humbling, and strange, and worth sitting with for a minute. Everything has a soul." Okay, so what did the earliest religions actually look like? Not like modern ones. That much is certain. No churches, no holy books. No priests collecting tithes. A landmark study published in Human Nature by Hervey Peoples, Pavel Duda, and Frank Marlowe used data from 33 hunter-gatherer societies across 6 continents to reconstruct the evolution of religious beliefs using phylogenetic analysis, the same statistical techniques biologists use to trace evolutionary relationships. The findings were striking. The oldest religious trait, present in the ancestral population that gave rise to all these societies, was animism. Every single society in the sample, 100%, had animistic beliefs. This matches what 19th century anthropologist Edward Tyler suspected when he called animism the groundwork of the philosophy of religion. Animism is the belief that natural things, animals, plants, rivers, rocks, mountains, thunder, wind, have some kind of intentional force or spirit. The tree isn't just a tree, the river isn't just moving water. Everything is inhabited by something that can influence your life. This isn't primitive superstition to be sneered at. This is how human beings naturally interpret the world when they live, embedded in nature, dependent on it, unable to control it. The anthropologist Tim Ingold, who spent decades studying hunter-gatherer cognition, put it this way: hunter-gatherers don't see themselves as separate from their environment. The division between mind and nature that seems obvious to us doesn't exist in their worldview. You aren't a human standing outside a forest looking in. You're a being in relationship with other beings, some of which happen to have leaves, some of which happen to have fur, some of which happen to flow downhill. Animism makes intuitive sense if you're constantly at the mercy of weather, animal migration, disease, and accident. If a storm destroys your camp, something caused it. If the deer don't come this season, something must be offended. Your brain is already wired to detect agency behind events. Animism is what that wiring produces when you live in a world you can't predict or control. Enter the shaman. According to the phylogenetic study, belief in an afterlife emerged next, then shamanism. 79% of hunter-gatherer societies in the sample had both. The two traits showed a significant positive correlation, meaning they tended to appear together and evolve together. If your society believes in an afterlife, it probably also has shamans. This suggests they might be functionally linked. A shaman is a part-time ritual specialist, someone who can move between the human world and the spirit world. They heal the sick, they predict the future, they communicate with the dead, they locate missing objects or people, they identify the spiritual causes of misfortune, and they frequently do this through altered states of consciousness, induced by fasting, sleep deprivation, rhythmic drumming, sensory isolation in caves, or psychoactive substances. The cave paintings at Lascaux in France, dating to about 17,000 years ago, and at Chauvet, dating to over 30,000 years ago, have been interpreted through this lens by researchers like Jean Klotz and David Lewis Williams. The animals painted on those walls float without ground lines. They overlap each other without regard for perspective or physical possibility. Geometric patterns, dots, grids, zigzags, appear alongside realistic beasts. Composite creatures that combine features of different species show up in both caves. Klotz and Lewis Williams argued these paintings might be records of shamanic visions, images seen during trance states that early humans believed revealed spiritual truths about the relationships between humans and animals. The deep caves, far from daylight, would have been ideal locations for vision quests. Sensory deprivation alone can induce hallucinations, and the phosphenes, light patterns, produced by the human visual system under stress, resemble some of the abstract patterns found in cave art worldwide. This interpretation is speculative. Not everyone in archaeology accepts the shamanism hypothesis, and some argue the evidence for ancient psychoactive drug use is thin. But something systematic was definitely happening at these sites. Research by Norbert Ojula at Lascaux found that the paintings followed a consistent order: horses first, then aurochs, then stags, each corresponding to a different mating season: spring, summer, autumn. The caves were used repeatedly over thousands of years. Certain chambers were accessible only by crawling through narrow passages. Others could hold dozens of people. These weren't idle doodles by bored teenagers. They were complex symbolic systems we can only partially decode, and the fact that people kept returning to the same caves for millennia suggests these places held persistent sacred significance. Whatever the paintings meant, they mattered enough to maintain for longer than recorded history. The goddess problem. Then there are the Venus figurines. Over 200 small statues of voluptuous female bodies have been found across Europe and parts of Asia, dating from roughly 40,000 to 10,000 BCE. They have exaggerated breasts, hips, and bellies. Many appear pregnant. Most have no faces, or only vaguely indicated facial features. Some, like the Venus of Willendorf from Austria, have elaborate hairstyles or headdresses. For much of the 20th century, the dominant interpretation was mother goddess worship. Early humans venerated a primal feminine deity associated with fertility, creation, and the earth itself. The archaeologist Marija Gimbutas championed this view in books like The Goddesses and Gods of Old Europe, arguing that prehistoric Europe had peaceful, egalitarian, goddess-centered societies before patriarchal Indo-European invaders arrived with their war gods and male dominance. The archaeological community doesn't really buy this anymore. The figurines span 30,000 years and thousands of miles. They were made by different cultures in different ecological settings with different social structures. Assuming they all meant the same thing is like finding toy soldiers in ancient Greece and action figures in modern Japan, and concluding that all humans worship the same war god. Some figurines might be fertility charms, worn by pregnant women, or used in birth rituals. Some might be self-portraits, created by women looking down at their own bodies from a first-person perspective, which would explain the missing feet and faces. Some might be teaching aids. Some might be toys. Some might be pornography. We genuinely don't know. What we can say is that symbolic representation of the human body, female bodies in particular, was important enough to repeat for 30 millennia across a vast geographic range. That's not nothing. It means something. We just can't be certain what. Why religion won? Here's a puzzle. Religion requires belief in things you can't see, hear, touch, or test. It demands time, energy, and resources devoted to rituals with no immediate material payoff. From a pure survival standpoint, it looks wasteful. Why did religious societies thrive while irreligious ones apparently didn't? One answer: because religion solves a math problem that kinship can't. In small groups, cooperation is easy. You know everyone. Reputations spread instantly. Cheaters get punished. Social norms enforce themselves through gossip and ostracism. But as groups grow larger, past about 150 people, free riders multiply. Why contribute to the communal hunt if you can hide in the back and still eat? Why share your food if you can hoard it? Beyond a certain size, kinship-based trust and direct reciprocity break down. You can't track everyone's reputation when there are thousands of strangers. Religion scales cooperation beyond kin. If an invisible God sees everything you do and punishes cheaters, you don't need to catch anyone yourself. The surveillance is automatic. Costly rituals, fasting, painful initiations, scarification, celibacy vows, food taboos, prove commitment in ways that can't be faked. You can't pretend to fast for 3 days. Either you suffered or you didn't. This signals to others that you're a genuine group member, not a free rider looking to exploit collective resources. Researchers studying 200 utopian communes founded in 19th century America found that 39% of religious communes were still functioning 20 years after their founding. Only 6% of secular ones were. Religion isn't just about explaining the universe. It's social technology for building groups larger than families and maintaining them across generations. When gods got bigger, ancestor worship emerged later than animism and shamanism, present in only 45% of hunter-gatherer societies in the sample. High gods, powerful creator deities, were even less common, appearing in 39%. And here's what matters. Active high gods, the kind who observe human behavior and punish wrongdoing, appeared in only 15%, almost always in the largest, most complex societies. This supports what researchers like Ara Norenzayan call the big gods hypothesis, outlined in his book of the same name. Moralizing gods who watch your behavior and enforce ethical rules didn't come first. They were culturally selected for. Societies with these beliefs could coordinate more people, trust strangers more readily, expand further, and compete more effectively against societies without them. The major world religions that exist today all have some version of moral oversight built in. Jesus preached that God sees your heart, not just your actions, and that the meek would inherit the earth. Muhammad received revelations about Judgment Day and divine accountability. The Buddha taught that karma tracks every deed across lifetimes. Judaism, Hinduism, Sikhism, same pattern. Religions that emphasized moral watching and consequences spread. The ones that didn't, largely faded. That's not coincidence. That's selection pressure operating over thousands of years. The mechanism works like this. If you believe an all-seeing God will punish you for cheating, you're less likely to cheat even when no human is watching. This makes you a safer cooperation partner. Groups of such believers can grow larger without collapsing into mutual exploitation. Over centuries and millennia, religions that emphasized moral surveillance, costly commitment, and in-group loyalty outcompeted those that didn't. The religions that spread were the ones that solved the trust problem at scale. This doesn't mean anyone consciously invented these beliefs for strategic advantage. Cultural evolution doesn't require intention. People don't sit around thinking, let me design a supernatural surveillance system to prevent free riding. The practices and beliefs that happen to make groups more successful were simply more likely to be imitated, taught, and spread. The 70,000-year experiment. What's remarkable isn't that humans became religious. Given how our brains evolved, that was almost inevitable. We were going to see agency in nature. We were going to try to influence it. We were going to wonder what happens after death. What's remarkable is how much religion did once it existed. It helped us bury our dead and process grief when a child died or a parent collapsed. It helped us make sense of suffering, randomness, and death, which otherwise have no sense to make. It helped strangers trust each other enough to trade, fight together, and eventually build cities full of people who would never meet face to face. It helped small bands of foragers in Turkey coordinate enough labor to build Göbekli Tepe 11,000 years ago, moving 16-ton pillars up a hill before anyone had figured out how to plant a seed on purpose. None of this proves religious beliefs are true in any metaphysical sense. The evolutionary story is studiously neutral on that question. It explains why we believe, not whether our beliefs correspond to anything real, but functionally, socially, psychologically, religion has been one of the most powerful forces in human history. We didn't just invent it. In a real sense, it shaped who we became. The people who built Göbekli Tepe didn't leave written records. We don't know what they called their gods. We don't know their creation myths or their funeral hymns or what they thought happened when you died. We just know they believed something strongly enough to spend generations moving mountains, literally, for reasons they never had the technology to explain to us. 12,000 years later, we're still doing versions of that. Building monuments to invisible powers, gathering in groups to perform rituals that bind us together, wondering what happens next, telling stories about where we came from and why any of this matters. The tools changed. The questions didn't.